The Arctic Circle is a cold and desolate land that is home to many indigenous groups spanning multiple continents from the Sami to the Nenets to the Yukagir to the Inuit. This land is sacred for many people. If you're from North America, when you think of the people of the Arctic, you might think quote unquote Eskimo, which refers to the Yupik and Inuit people, and sometimes also the Aleut as well by relation. These people are native to the region from western Alaska all the way to Greenland with the Greenlandic Inuit. They're descendants of a large expansion out of Alaska starting 1,000 years ago. Prior to this, they were mostly in the Bering Strait area. Well, then why do we see evidence of people living in the furthest corner of North America, the furthest corner of Greenland, almost 4,500 years ago? A culture that existed in the North American Arctic but aren't the ancestors of the Inuit and are actually more closely related to Russian Siberian native groups. Who were they? How did they get there? And where are they now? Well, to understand who these people were and where they went, we must first talk about the sites that were found. Independence One is the name given for a culture in northeastern Greenland that existed between 2400 to 1900 BC. This is the northernmost culture to ever exist. A culture that existed on the fringes of North America in the high Arctic. This was one of a few cultures that existed in Greenland prior to the Thule expansion, aka when Inuit groups entered the region. There were three major sites found: Inuktitut Nunat, Adamsi Nuth, and Delta Terrasern. In each of these, they found dwellings, tools, and animal remains. Independence 2 was another culture that existed in the same area as Independence 1 but existed between 700 to 80 BC, way after Independence 1 was already abandoned. The Saqqaq culture was in the southern coastal regions of Greenland and lasted much longer than Independence 1, from 4,500 years ago up until 2,800 years ago. Saqqaq has many archaeological sites. What we know is that they lived in small tents, hunted seals, seabirds, and other marine animals. And finally, the last culture to be discovered was the Pre-Dorset culture, the ancestor of the Dorset culture. The Pre-Dorset culture existed from 3200 BC to 850 BC, coexisting with the Saqqaq and Independence, and reached from Ellesmere Island to the Northwest Territories all the way to Newfoundland and Labrador. The people of these cultures would be considered Paleo-Eskimos, or as I will be referring to them as, the Paleo-Inuit, because they were in the majority of the North American Arctic in what is now northern Canada and Greenland before the modern Inuit, before the Eskimo groups. The Dorset culture was at its peak actually between 500 to 1000 AD, and seemingly started to disappear around the time of the Thule expansion of the Inuit people. Seeing as these people existed in such a large area in the Canadian Arctic, many would assume that they are related to the Inuit. Actually, genetic sequencing of a Saqqaq individual revealed that these people, these Paleo-Inuit cultures, were not related to or the ancestors of the Inuit, but actually much more closely related to the indigenous Russian Siberian peoples like the Chukchis and Koryaks. The Paleo-Inuit are not closely related to modern indigenous groups. They weren't a subgroup of any modern indigenous group that exists. The Paleo-Inuit, being in the Arctic, did not have much contact with other indigenous North American groups. Their rapidly quick migration from Alaska all the way to Greenland and Labrador was likely aided from their use of the bow and arrow, which was an innovation during this time period over 4,000 years ago in parts of North America. They were actually the ones credited with introducing bow and arrow technology to Native American populations in eastern Canada by 2000 BC. The Paleo-Inuit were descendants of a migration from Siberia to North America, independent of the migration of the ancestors of modern-day indigenous Americans that happened thousands of years earlier, independent of the migrations of the modern Inuit people as well. They stayed relatively genetically isolated. Most of their DNA was related to Bering Strait groups, meaning related to the Chukotko-Kamchatkan and Eskimo groups. A study found Paleo-Inuit ancestry in the Athabascan groups and other Nadine-speaking populations, which makes sense due to the fact that the Nadine originated in the Beringia area, noting that the Paleo-Inuit and Nadine's ancestors lived closely amongst each other for millennia. Geneticist David Reich hypothesized that the Paleo-Inuit could have actually spread the Nadine languages to the North American continent, making them the cultural and linguistic ancestor of the Nadine people, which includes groups like the Navajo and Apache. The Paleo-Inuit people only took about 1,000 to 1,500 years to spread from Alaska all the way to the furthest point of Greenland. These people existed in the Canadian Arctic for thousands of years up until about 1000 AD, which was the end of the Dorset culture. Coincidentally, this is also the time of the Thule expansion of the Inuit people. The reason I say coincidentally is because there is actually no evidence of a meeting of these two people. Even though they both existed in the Canadian Arctic, there is no genetic evidence of Paleo-Inuit DNA in Inuit groups. There is no evidence of violence or even fighting between these groups either. Is it possible there was fighting? Yes. Is it possible that the Inuit came at a time when the Paleo-Inuit were at the brink of extinction and outhunted them? Sure. It's also possible that they had limited contact and the Dorset culture faded away as the Thule culture took their place. Scholars had thought that the Sadler Mute, which were a people living in near isolation mainly on and around Coates Island, Walrus Island, and Southampton Island in Hudson Bay up until 1902 to 1903, might have been the last remnants of the Dorset culture, as they had a culture and dialect distinct from the mainland Inuit. Encounters with Europeans and exposure to infectious disease caused the deaths of the last members of this people. A 2002 paper suggests that the mitochondrial DNA of Sadler Mute people was related to that of both the Dorset and Thule peoples, perhaps suggesting local admixture. A subsequent 2012 genetic study, however, showed no genetic link between the Sadler Mute and the Dorset. The Paleo Inuit disappeared 1,000 years ago, after about 3,500 years in the Canadian Arctic. Why they disappeared, we don't know, but what we do know is they were a strong people surviving the Arctic for millennia, bringing innovation, and even though their genetic legacy is non existent, their story lives on. And as we get more and more information about them, hopefully we will be able to make a connection with them and modern people living today.